In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Amen. I start with a preface to the sermon. And my first question to you all is, what strategies have you put in place to survive or possibly thrive during this lockdown? I work in Kingston Hospital as a chaplain, and as you know, there's an explosion of COVID in this area and by extension in the hospital. Life there is challenging, in fact very challenging, but in some ways life at home is even more challenging. We all know about taking exercise, eating our vegetables, walking our dog, and perhaps holding on to a sense of humour. But I just wonder, have you introduced any new activity? We've been watching some of our old holiday videos. I wonder whether you do that sort of thing. Photographs, film and music, which my husband has created over many years. Last week, we re-watched our holiday in Sicily 7 years ago. And here is my starting point and connection to the feast of Christ the King, the last Sunday of the Church's year. As we've already heard, next Sunday is Advent Sunday. In 1925, Pope Pius XI created this festival, and in 1970, it was moved from October to the last Sunday of the Church's year to end the year on a point of triumph. As you know, common worship follows this pattern. Monre Ali Cathedral in Sicily. This is a most magnificent cathedral outside Palermo, built in the 12th century. It is full of gold and silver, murals, pictures, wonderful stone columns, and above the high altar is a picture of the face of Christ. No crown, no sword, no obvious wealth, but a face to me both of strength and of compassion. The guidebook says, Christ the Pantocrator, meaning all-powerful, Christ in majesty, mild but stern, a powerful judge of humanity. This echoed the early Christian images of the Eastern Church. So hold on to that image as we explore the biblical images in our readings. Shepherds, shepherding stories, and shepherding metaphors abound throughout the Bible, as one would expect in an agrarian and rural culture. The development of the shepherd as a metaphor for the king, the lowly status of shepherds make this very daring, and then for God himself. These traditions are very pertinent to our Gospels. In our Old Testament reading, in exile, Ezekiel rages against the kings and leaders of Israel, who should have cared for the people, but led them to shame, exile, and devastation. But Ezekiel promises that God will gather the sheep once more and set wise and caring shepherds over them. Ezekiel condemns the kings and leaders for neglecting and exploiting the people, as shepherds who feed on the sheep instead of feeding the sheep, who leave the flock to wander and to be attacked. Against this background, God, himself the true King, comes as a good shepherd to the rescue of Israel. He will search out and bring home those in exile. He will provide for them in abundance in their own land, ensure they rest in safety from their enemies, heal them, and care for the sick and defenseless. Some leaders and shepherds are not the only ones to feel the edge of God's anger. Some of the sheep are also greedy and ruthless. Not all the people of Israel will share this idyllic restoration. Those who have exploited the invasion and the exile to grow rich at the expense of their community will find that a just leader is not to their liking. But God will send a descendant of the house of David as a true shepherd to establish the rule of righteousness. And to our gospel reading. Matthew is a very expressive writer. He wants to get the attention of his readers, and he doesn't hold back. He is very strong on the concept of judgment. He paints an awe-inspiring judgment scene. As you know, he is focused on a Jewish audience, and he wants them to understand that they, as the children of God, have fallen away from their responsibilities and commitment to being God's people. He hammers home the need to care for the poor and those in need. Fundamentally, what sort of king is this who we encounter in the poor, the weak, the prisoner and the stranger? A judge, yes, holding supreme authority and reigning in glory, like the painting of the face of Christ in the Montreal Cathedral. But perhaps this is a hidden glory, veiled to those who live by the world's values. Perhaps Christ will only be recognized by those who know their own spiritual poverty and whose hearts and minds are open to receive him in faith. Rising out of this promise, but far transcending it, is the pledge that God will raise up a branch of righteousness, who will put God's justice into effect, who will create salvation for God's people. This king will be called Yahweh is our righteousness. This king will embody God's own promise, covenant faithfulness, justice, and loyalty. So in conclusion, back to where I started. Yes, at one level, the pandemic has spurred us into action, and all credit to you and many people of all faiths and none who have risen to the challenge of helping those in need. But as we move to Advent, a time of penitence, as we wait patiently for the Incarnation, I urge you to reflect more deeply. How do we understand and respond to the kingdom of God, based on justice, goodness, and right relationship with God and each other, the first and great commandment, and loving our neighbour? What about the refugee, the homeless, the abused, those in despair, and those who are suicidal? So my final sentence is, it's not what we can't do, it's what we can do. And that encompasses both prayer and action. Amen.